There's a quiet loneliness that doesn't scream or cry. It sits silently inside women over 40, growing deeper with time, often completely unnoticed by the world. Psychology calls this emotional deprivation, but that term barely scratches the surface of what it feels like when connection becomes fragile, scarce, or conditional. This emotional abyss doesn't appear overnight. It forms slowly, shaped by years of unmet needs, quiet sacrifices, social expectations, and invisible grief. From a psychological perspective, we're all wired for attachment. Connection isn't a luxury, it's a biological necessity. In early adulthood, relationships often come easily through family, marriage, kids, careers, and social circles. But for many women over 40, these structures either change or disappear completely. Children grow up and move out. Marriages dissolve, either legally or just emotionally. Parents age or pass away. Careers plateau or lose their meaning. And what's left is a woman who has spent decades giving, adapting, and enduring, now standing face to face with herself in an unfamiliar silence. Psychologists describe midlife as a time of identity reevaluation. Erik Erikson called this the conflict between generativity and stagnation. Women who feel emotionally connected find a sense of purpose, while those who feel unseen begin to stagnate inside. Now, this stagnation doesn't mean they stop doing things. Many women remain perfectly functional, productive, and socially polite. But emotionally, something begins to hollow out. This is where the abyss begins. This emotional abyss isn't just simple loneliness. Loneliness can be temporary. The abyss is persistent. It's the feeling that even when people are around, no one truly sees you. It's the slow, painful realization that conversations always stay on the surface, that being vulnerable feels unsafe, and that expressing a need feels like being a burden. Over time, women learn to silence their own emotional hunger because society often rewards them for being emotionally self-sufficient while quietly punishing them for having emotional needs. Neuroscience even shows that prolonged emotional isolation activates the same pain centers in the brain as a physical injury. But unlike a broken bone, the emotional pain in women over 40 is often minimized or dismissed. Friends say, "Just be grateful for what you have." Family says, "You need to be strong." Culture implies, "You should be fulfilled by now." These messages create a deep internal conflict. A woman feels this pain, but she also feels ashamed for feeling it. And this psychological tension is where many women start to disconnect from their own emotional truth. Consider the story of a woman we'll call Aisha. She was 42 when she first noticed the silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of being needed. Her mornings were orderly, her house was clean, but her phone rarely rang. Her children had moved abroad. Her marriage had ended years earlier, not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet, emotional erosion. She had done everything that was expected of her. She'd been a good daughter, a good wife, a good mother. Now, she was simply existing. At night, Aisha would sit by her window, watching the lights flicker on in neighboring homes. She wondered what those lives felt like from the inside. Psychology calls this social comparison, but for Aisha, it was something more painful. It was a deep, aching longing to feel emotionally anchored to another human being. Attachment theory helps explain why this longing gets stronger with age. As we get older, our brains become less tolerant of superficial bonds. Our nervous system starts seeking safety, familiarity, and genuine emotional resonance. Casual chit-chat just doesn't cut it anymore. Women over 40 often crave depth, but depth requires vulnerability, and vulnerability always carries the risk of rejection. And many of these women have been rejected emotionally before. They've been dismissed, abandoned, or taken for granted. These experiences condition the brain to associate closeness with pain. So, as a defense mechanism, the psyche withdraws. On the surface, this withdrawal looks like independence, but internally, it feels like emptiness. Aisha told herself she was strong. She told herself she didn't need anyone. But her body was telling a different story. She experienced fatigue without any physical cause, tearfulness without a clear trigger, and a constant nagging sense of restlessness. Psychology recognizes these as somatic symptoms, physical expressions of unmet emotional needs. The body speaks when the mind has learned to stay silent. One evening, Honey went to a small get-together. Laughter filled the room, but she felt completely detached, as if she were watching life from behind a sheet of glass. This feeling of dissociation is common among emotionally isolated people. It's the mind's way of protecting itself from a longing it believes can never be fulfilled. But the abyss doesn't stay quiet forever. Eventually, it demands to be recognized. It surfaces in dreams, in sudden, overwhelming waves of sadness, in sharp pangs of jealousy toward other people's intimacy. Many women feel this and immediately conclude that something is wrong with them. But in reality, nothing is wrong. The psyche is just signaling a fundamental need that has been ignored for far too long. Psychological research shows that women are often socialized to be relational caregivers. When they lose these relational roles without replacing them with emotionally reciprocal bonds, they experience something called role loss grief. This grief is often completely unacknowledged because there's no clear event to mourn. There is no funeral for emotional absence. There is no ritual for unreceived love. So, Aisha started writing in a notebook. At first, she just wrote about mundane things, like her daily routine. But over time, deeper truths began to emerge. She wrote about wanting to be held, not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted someone to ask her how she was, and then truly, deeply listen to the answer. She wanted to be chosen, without having to prove she was worthy of it. This act of self-expression was a major psychological turning point. Awareness is always the first step out of the abyss. When a woman can acknowledge her emotional hunger without judging herself for it, she begins to reclaim her own power. But connection doesn't just reappear simply because it's wanted. The struggle for connection in women over 40 is complex. Social circles have often shrunk. Dating can carry stigma and a lot of fear. Trust feels incredibly risky. The brain, shaped by years of past disappointments, actively resists feeling hopeful. Months later, Honey met someone. His presence was calm, his voice steady. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. But right along with that feeling came a wave of intense fear. Psychology calls this an approach-avoidance conflict. The closer connection gets, the stronger the urge to pull away becomes. The emotional abyss teaches survival through distance. What stopped her wasn't courage, but pure exhaustion. She was just tired of surviving emotionally. So she allowed herself to stay. And slowly, she learned that connection doesn't erase the pain, but it gives the pain context. It makes suffering a shared experience rather than a solitary one. Now, not all women find this resolution through a romantic partner. Many find it through deep friendships, creative expression, spiritual communities, or therapy. The essential ingredient is emotional reciprocity. Connection heals, not because it fills the abyss completely, but because it reminds the nervous system that safety can exist outside of isolation. Psychologically, healing the emotional abyss requires 3 things: acknowledgement, self-compassion, and relational risk. Acknowledgement allows the truth to surface. Self-compassion fights back against the shame. And relational risk opens the door to new possibilities. Women over 40 are not broken. They are not late. They are not too much. They are human beings whose emotional depth has simply outgrown shallow connections. The abyss they feel is not a sign of failure. It is a signal that their inner world is rich, alive, and still longing to be met. Honey still has her quiet nights, but the silence no longer feels empty. It feels spacious. The difference is subtle, but it's profound. She is no longer invisible to herself. And that is where true connection really begins.